The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett have each covered considerable ground when it comes to fleshing out Mandalorian culture, history, and lineage. While we've seen Mandalorians on numerous occasions and have even visited Mandalore throughout the events of the Clone Wars and Rebels, the character of Din Djarin serves as one of the prominent conduits between us, the audience, and the culture and practices of the Mandalorian people. Through him and his associates, we learn of an event known as the Night of 1,000 Tears, and we know that this dire event took place during the Imperial era. But what exactly did this fateful night entail? Why is the Night of 1,000 Tears such a cornerstone in Mandalorian history? And what happened during this dreadful period of time? Well, stick with us, weary acolytes of the galaxy, and let's delve into this today. Spoilers ahead for Chapter 5 for the Book of Boba Fett, as we break down everything that we know that occurred during the Night of 1,000 Tears. In essence, the Night of 1,000 Tears spelled the complete extinction of the Mandalorian people and the destruction of their homeworld of Mandalore. This event is comparable to the toll of Order 66 on the Jedi, in that very few survivors were able to come out of the dreaded night alive, as the night left their numbers and practices waning. Following the aftermath of the Mandalorian Civil War in the latter days of the Empire, Bo-Katan rose to power and ruled over the remaining Mandalorian kingdom with the Darksaber in hand, denoting her as the leader of Mandalore. The most recent Mandalorian Civil War in question came to an end in the year 2 BBY, and played a direct part in leading into the Night of 1,000 Tears. Throughout the reign of the Empire, Mandalore had been all but subservient to Palpatine and his regime, remaining loyal to the Empire as long as they were allowed to continue with their way of life. After Clan Ren elected to defy the mandates of the Imperial Empire, however, the Mandalorian loyalists led by Gar Saxon opposed this coup and attempted to squash the rebellion that was rising under Sabine Wren in the 4th season of Star Wars Rebels. With the assistance of her allies, Sabine was able to challenge Gar Saxon to a duel for the Darksaber and subsequently the rule of Mandalore. And upon defeating him in solo combat and returning the Darksaber to Bo-Katan, she remained behind in order to liberate her people from the grip of the Empire. This being the key moment where Bo-Katan was gifted the Darksaber and did not win it in single combat. This peace would prove to be short-lived, as it would go on to lead directly into the eventual retribution from the Imperial forces in the waning days of the Imperial regime, who sought revenge against Mandalore's treachery. The Empire, despite facing the full might of rebel forces, conducted the Mandalorian genocide in the final years before their own eventual collapse. In response to the Mandalorians rebelling, the Empire launched a counterattack with the fullest extent of their artillery, mainly TIE bombers, utterly annihilating the Mandalorian people and culture in one fell swoop in perhaps one of the most brutal attacks that the Empire had ever launched, an event that would come to be known as the Great Purge of Mandalore. The night began in silence. However, this would soon end, as the massacre entailed legions of TIE fighters bombing Mandalore's largest cities from the skies, while legions of KX series Viper probe droids marched on the city in search of survivors amidst the ashes. We also know that Moff Gideon was present here, shooting down Mandalorians by the dozens. The dire events of this fateful day resulted in the nigh extinction of the Mandalorian culture and creed, leaving only those who were fortunate enough to be off-world at the time as survivors. The droids scoured the wreckage of the bombings in search of any who may have survived, and were promptly tasked with executing anyone that they found, as the TIE fighters turned their fire on fields of Mandalorian recruits. After all of the major cities had been decimated, the screams of these recruits, though, would live in infamy among Mandalorian folklore, among those that managed to survive. In the aftermath that followed, any remaining Mandalorians stayed as far away from the Mandalorian sector as they could, being scattered throughout the galaxy in their own independent factions. Some of these fragments would join together in small pockets of Mandalorian refugees, but many, like Din Djarin, would go on to become independent contractors and wanderers through the galaxy, without a homeworld of their own to speak of anymore. Among these survivors was the Armorer, who attributes the night to the failure of Bo-Katan, and specifically, she laments Bo-Katan for accepting the Darksaber without partaking in the ritual combat necessary to prove that the Darksaber was truly hers to wield and command. We see Bo-Katan receive the Darksaber from Sabine Wren in Rebels, the event that the Armorer warns is a cautionary tale for the remaining Mandalorian creed. She attributes a modest level of superstition to the myth, but she believes that the unceremonious passing of the Darksaber was a direct curse and result in the eventual fall of the Mandalorian people. All things considered though, the Night of 1,000 Tears was a relatively straightforward operation. The Mandalorian culture believed that the Empire would be too distracted by the rebels, or that the rebels would be able to come to their aid. However, the Empire's decision to attack in full force is what ultimately resulted in the death of so many Mandalorian lives. The night began with bombers attacking every major city, killing most of the populace. They were then subsequently followed by Viper droids and massive gunships equipped with heavy repeating blasters, one of which was manned by Moff Gideon. And finally, to pick up the pieces, the KX series droids as well as the probe droids would scour the wreckage in search of any Mandalorian with one simple order: kill on sight. All of this apparently due to the vengeance of the Darksaber. In the most recent chapter of the Book of Boba Fett, the armorer describes the Darksaber as a curse when in the wrong hands, and when it is haphazardly given away to the undeserving. Dire ramifications arise as a result, as the armorer believes that the Night of 1,000 Tears was a direct result of Bo-Katan's arrogance. During the Great Purge of Mandalore, the Darksaber was presumed to be lost in the carnage, as Bo-Katan was barely able to escape with her life intact, let alone the saber, and she inadvertently left the Darksaber behind. This directly allowed Moff Gideon to assume control of the weapon, as he conducted a final sweep of the dying planet in search of any survivors. As the leading commander of the final battalion to sweep Mandalore, Gideon took the saber and kept it for himself, ultimately cluing Bo-Katan into the weapon's location several years later. From here, Bo-Katan conducted a plan to reclaim the weapon from Gideon, which directly leads into the events of The Mandalorian Season 2, where we pick up where her quest last left off. But at this time, it seems as if she too is a wandering freelancer who was assembling her own faction of surviving Mandalorians in order to rebuild a sliver of the previous kingdom. But she is still leagues away from re-establishing the former glory of Mandalore. In the years between the destruction of Mandalore and the events of The Mandalorian, roughly 10 years have passed, during which time she has grown her crew and sought to assemble any remaining Mandalorian refugees to her cause, and her claim to the throne of Mandalore. But whether or not the Great Purge of Mandalore was her fault is currently up for debate, a debate that I would love to hear your opinion on in the comments down below. Anyway, my friends, what are your thoughts on the Night of 1,000 Tears? And do you think it was Bo-Katan's fault for accepting the Darksaber? And what are your thoughts on the fullest extent of what the Mandalorians endured during this fateful event? As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching the channel. Hit that subscribe button, and may the Force be with you.